Sydney direct to west, Indonesia 714 Heavy, with you at 23,900.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, United 863 Heavy.
National Jet 340 Heavy, turn right heading 240. Turn right heading 240, National Jet 340 Heavy. National Jet 340 Heavy, descend and maintain 4000. Link 11 Sierra Tango, maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final. Descend and maintain 4000, National Jet 340 Heavy.
Maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final. Q link 11 Sierra Tango.
Speedbird 1 Heavy, turn left heading 180, descend and maintain 5000.
Turn left heading 180, descend and maintain 5,000. Speedbird 1 Heavy.
Delta 41 Heavy is 25 nautical miles southeast of Sydney Kingsford at 5,000 feet, requesting aisles approach any runway of Sydney Kingsford.
Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy, turn left heading 300, descend and maintain 3000, maintain 3000 until established on the localizer, cleared aisles runway 34 right approach. Delta 41 Heavy, turn right heading 250.
Turn right heading 250, Delta 41 Heavy.
National Jet 340 Heavy, expect vectors for the aisles approach runway 34 right at Sydney Kingsford.
Turn left heading 300, descend and maintain 3000. Maintain 3000 until established on the localizer. Cleared aisles runway 34 right. Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy.
Aircalin 141 Heavy, turn right heading 180, descend and maintain 4000. Ejetta 204 Heavy, turn left heading 170, descend and maintain 2000. National Jet 340 Heavy, turn right heading 300, descend and maintain 3000, maintain 3000 until established on the localizer, cleared aisles runway 34 right approach. Delta 41 Heavy, turn right heading 300, descend and maintain 4000, maintain 4000 until established on the localizer, cleared aisles runway.
Indonesia 714 Heavy is 13 nautical miles northwest of Mittagong at 18,400 feet, requesting aisles approach any runway at Sydney Kingsford. Turn right heading 250, Aircalin 141 Heavy.
Aircalin 141 Heavy, expect vectors for the aisles approach runway 34 right at Sydney Kingsford.
Roger, Aircalin 141 Heavy.
Clink 409 Tango Kilo, turn right heading 070. Fiji 915, expect vectors for the aisles approach runway 34 right at Sydney Kingsford.
Turn right heading 070, Q-Link 409 Tango Kilo. Roger, Fiji 9.
Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Roger, Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy, maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final. Aircalin 141 Heavy, turn right heading 300, descend and maintain 3000, maintain 3000 until established on the localizer, cleared aisles runway 34 right approach.
Sydney Director West, Q-Link 1524, with you at 19,000. Turn right heading 300, descend and maintain 3000, maintain 3000 until established on the localizer, cleared ILS runway 34 right, Aircalin 141 Heavy.
Maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final. Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy.
Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy, contact Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7. Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy.
Clink 1524, radar contact, say approach request. Clink 409 Tango Kilo, maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final.
Sydney Director West, Qantas 64 Quebec Foxtrot Super, with you at 21,100.
Ejetta 204 Heavy, turn right heading 200. Speedbird 1 Heavy, turn left heading 150, descend and maintain 5000.
Turn right heading 200, Egypt Air 204 Heavy.
Maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final, Q-Link 409 Tango Kilo.
Clink 409 Tango Kilo, turn left heading 360, descend and maintain 3000, maintain 3000 until established on the localizer, cleared aisles runway 34 right approach. Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, National Jet 340 Heavy. Delta 41 Heavy, maintain 170 knots until 5 mile final.
Q-Link 1524 is 11 nautical miles northwest of Mittagong at 19,000 feet, requesting ILS approach runway 34 left at Sydney Kingsford.
Fiji 915, turn right heading 260, descend and maintain 3000.
Matrix 187 is 8 nautical miles west of Cessnock at 15,900 feet, requesting ILS approach runway 34 right at Sydney Kingsford.
Delta 41 Heavy, contact Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7. Aircalin 141 Heavy, maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, Delta 41 Heavy.
Fiji 915, turn right heading 300, descend and maintain 3000. Maintain 3000 until established on the localizer. Cleared ILS runway 34 right approach.
Turn right heading 300, descend and maintain 3000. Maintain 3000 until established on the localizer. Cleared ILS runway 34 right, Fiji 915.
Qantas 64 Quebec Foxtrot Super is 13 nautical miles northwest of Mittagong at 18,500 feet, requesting ILS approach runway 34 left at Sydney Kingsford.
Airport in sight, Q-Link 409 Tango Kilo. New Zealand 228 Heavy, requesting ILS approach any runway at Sydney Kingsford.
Clink 409 Tango Kilo, maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final. EJETA 204 Heavy, turn right heading 290, maintain 2000. Maintain 2000 until established on the localizer. Cleared ILS runway 34 left approach.
Maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final, Q-Link 409 Tango Kilo.
Turn right heading 290, maintain 2000 until established on the localizer. Cleared ILS runway 34 left, Egypt Air 204 Heavy.
Fiji 915, maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final.
Maintain 180 knots until 6 mile final, Fiji 915. Matrix 187, requesting descent via bore 3 Alpha arrival.
Aircalin 141, Indonesia 714 Heavy, turn right heading 100.
Turn right heading 100, descend and maintain 3000, Indonesia 714 Heavy. Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, Aircalin 141 Heavy.
Qantas 64 Quebec Foxtrot Super, turn right heading 070, descend and maintain 2500. New Zealand 228 Heavy, turn left heading 240, descend and maintain 3000.
Turn right heading 070, descend and maintain 2500, Qantas 64 Quebec Foxtrot Super.
Link 1524, turn right heading 050, descend and maintain 3000.
Turn left heading 240, descend and maintain 3000, New Zealand 228 Heavy.
Clink 409 Tango Kilo, contact Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, Q-Link 409 Tango Kilo. Speedbird 1 Heavy is 12 nautical miles northeast of Shell Harbour at 5,000 feet, requesting ILS approach any runway at Sydney Kingsford.
Speedbird 1 Heavy, expect vectors for the ILS approach runway 34 right at Sydney Kingsford. Speedbird 1 Heavy, turn left heading 040, descend and maintain 4000.
Turn left heading 040, descend and maintain 4000, Speedbird 1 Heavy.
Fiji 915, contact Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, Fiji 915.
Clink 1524, turn right heading 140.
Turn right heading 140, Q-Link 1524.
Indonesia 714 Heavy, turn right heading 130, descend and maintain.
Turn right heading 130, descend and maintain 2000, Indonesia 714 Heavy.
EJETA 204 Heavy, you are aligned with the wrong runway, please check runway assignment. Indonesia 714 Heavy, turn left heading.
Turn left heading 060, Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Turn left heading 360, descend and maintain 3000, maintain 3000 until established on the localizer, clear dials runway 34 right, Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Clink 1524, turn left heading 060, descend and maintain 3000.
Egypt Air 204 Heavy, request frequency change.
Sydney Director West, Qantas 1438 Super, with you at 15,300.
Matrix 187, proceed as requested. Egypt 204 Heavy, contact Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7.
Descending via 43 Alpha arrival, Matrix 187.
Clink 1524, expect vectors for the Isles approach runway 34 right at Sydney Kingsford.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, Egypt Air 204 Heavy.
New Zealand 228 Heavy, reduce speed to 200 knots.
Reduce speed to 200 knots, New Zealand 228 Heavy.
New Zealand 228 Heavy, turn right heading 290. Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, Indonesia 714 Heavy. Korean Air 2731 Super, frequency change approved, good day. Frequency change approved Korean Air 2731 Super, good day. Q-Link 409 Tango Kilo, when able turn left and contact ground, please expedite, traffic on final. Wilco, Q-Link 409 Tango Kilo. United 863 Heavy, cross runway 34 left, please expedite.
Crossing runway 34 left, United 863 Heavy.
DHL 3, cross runway 34 left, please expedite.
Crossing runway 34 left, DHL 3.
Q-Link 409 Tango Kilo, contact Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5. Contacting Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5, Q-Link 409 Tango Kilo. Singapore 662, frequency change approved, good day. United 863 Heavy, contact Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5.
Thank you, good day, Singapore 662.
DHL 3, contact Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5, United 863 Heavy.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5, DHL 3. Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy, request permission to cross runway 34 left.
Singapore 420 Super, wind 3408, runway 34 left, cleared for takeoff. Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy, hold short of runway 34 left. Cleared for takeoff, runway 34 left, Singapore 420 Super.
Holding short runway 34 left, velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy.
PG 915, when able turn left and contact ground, please expedite, traffic on final. Wilco, PG 915. Singapore 662, frequency change approved, good day.
Thank you, good day, Singapore 662.
PG 915, contact Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5. Contacting Sydney Kingsford ground on 126. Indonesia 714 Heavy. Number 1, cleared to land, runway 34 right, Indonesia 714 Heavy. Singapore 420 Super, when able turn left and contact ground, please expedite, traffic on final. Singapore 420 Super, frequency change approved, good day. Frequency change approved Singapore 420 Super, good day.
National Jet 340 Heavy, request permission to cross runway 34 left.
Q80007, line up and wait runway 34 left.
Line up and wait runway 34 left, Q80007.
Sydney Kingsford Tower, Sky Queen 01,
500.
ready for departure at runway 34 left, departing east.
400. 300.
Egypt Air 204 Heavy, when able turn left, contact ground on the taxiway.
200. 100.
228 Heavy, is on final runway 34 right.
50.
Velocity
40.
093 Sierra
30.
Quebec Heavy,
20.
cross runway 34
Retard.
left, please
Retard.
expedite.
Wilco, Egypt Air 204 Heavy.
National Jet 340 Heavy, cross runway 34 left, please expedite.
Sydney Kingsford Tower, Philippine 274, ready for departure at runway 34 left, departing north.
Crossing runway 34 left. National Jet 340 Heavy.
Crossing runway 34 left. Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy.
Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy, contact Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5. National Jet 340 Heavy, contact Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5. Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy.
Turkish, Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Wilco, Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Delta 41 Heavy, cross runway 34 left, please expedite.
Crossing runway 34 left, Delta 41 Heavy.
Speedbird 1 Heavy, wind 3408, number 2, runway 34 right, clear to land. Qantas 64 Quebec Foxtrot Super, wind 3408, number 1, runway 34 left, clear to land. Number 2, clear to land, runway 34 right, Speedbird 1 Heavy. Delta 41 Heavy, contact Sydney Kingsford ground on 126. Indonesia 714 Heavy, contact Sydney Kingsford.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford ground on 126.5, Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Airplane 141 Heavy, contact Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7.
Taxiing to runway 34 left. Qantas 1.
Sydney Kingsford ground. National Jet 340 Heavy. Request taxi to Bay 25 at the International Terminal.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, Airplane 141 Heavy. CG 915, cross runway 25, please expedite. Crossing runway 25, PG 915. Taxiing to runway 34 left, Ethiopian 558 Heavy.
Holding position. National Jet 340 Heavy.
Qantas 1, hold position.
Holding position. Qantas 1.
Emirates 578 Super, taxi to runway 34 left. Indonesia 71.
Taxiing to International Terminal Bay 57, will hold short of 725, Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Thank you. Good day. Velocity 093 Sierra Quebec Heavy.
Sydney Kingsford ground, Lufthansa 809 Heavy, ready for pushback with information November, requesting runway 34 left. CG 915, request permission to cross runway 34 left. Sydney Kingsford ground, Sesh 1606, ready to taxi to runway 34 left with information November. Qantas 1, taxi to 16 when -34L via Foxtrot. Sydney Kingsford ground, New Zealand 228 Heavy, request taxi to parking. Egypt Air 204 Heavy, taxi to International Terminal Bay 61 via Alpha, Golf.
Sydney Kingsford ground, Delta 41 Heavy, request taxi to Bay 61 at the International Terminal.
Taxiing to 16R34L via Foxtrot. Qantas 1.
Taxiing to International Terminal Bay 61 via Alpha, Golf, Egypt Air 204 Heavy.
Egypt Air 204 Heavy, hold position.
Sydney Kingsford ground, American 007, ready to taxi with information November. Sydney Kingsford ground, all Nippon. Sydney Kingsford ground, Indonesia 714 Heavy, request taxi to Bay 58 at the International Terminal.
Sydney Kingsford ground, New Zealand 228 Heavy, request taxi to parking.
Sydney Kingsford ground. Qantas 1, ready to taxi with information November.
Emirates 578 Super, taxi to waypoint via Gulf 1. CG915, contact Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7. Taxiing to waypoint via Gulf 1, Emirates 578 Super. Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, CG915. Airplane 141 Heavy, taxi to parking, at your discretion. Taxi to parking, Airplane 141 Heavy. Ethiopian 558 Heavy, request permission to cross runway 7.
Sydney Kingsford Ground, National Jet 340.
Indonesia 714 Heavy, request permission to cross runway 7.
Ethiopian 558 Heavy, cross runway 25, please expedite. All Nippon 409 Tango Kilo Super, runway 34 left, taxi via Juliet, Alpha, Alpha 6, contact tower when ready.
Taxiing to runway 34 left via Juliet, Alpha, Alpha 6, all Nippon 409 Tango Kilo Super.
Indonesia 80 Romeo India, taxi to runway 34 left, hold short of 725. Crossing runway 25, Ethiopian 558 Heavy. Sydney Kingsford Ground, pushback approved, tail to the north. Taxiing to runway 34 left, will hold short of 725, Indonesia 80 Romeo India. Sydney Kingsford Ground, New Zealand 228 Heavy, request taxi to parking. Lufthansa 809 Heavy, hold position. Indonesia 714.
Crossing runway 25, Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford Ground on 126.5, Qantas 1.
Qantas 64 Quebec Foxtrot Super, request permission to cross runway 25.
Sydney Kingsford Ground, Oscar Hotel Whiskey Oscar Whiskey, ready for pushback with information November, requesting runway 34 left.
Sydney Kingsford Ground, Qantas 1, ready to taxi to runway 34 left with information November.
Egypt Air 204 Heavy, continue taxi. Sydney Kingsford Ground, Emirates 578 Super, ready to taxi with information November.
Australia 22, request permission to cross
Indonesia 714 Heavy, request permission to cross runway 34 left.
Q-Link 1524, when able turn left. Indonesia 714 Heavy, hold short of run.
Holding short runway 34 left, Indonesia 714 Heavy. Sydney Kingsford Tower, Turkish 999 Super, ready for departure as runway 34 left, departing straight out.
Skyqueen 01, frequency change approved, good day. Q-Link 1524, contact Sydney Kingsford Ground on 126.5. Frequency change approved Skyqueen 01, good day. Contacting Sydney Kingsford Ground on 126.5, Q-Link 1524. Velocity 459 Heavy, line up and wait runway 34 left. Line up and wait runway 34 left, velocity 459 Heavy. Thank you, good day, Skyqueen 01. UPS 1390 Heavy, when able turn right, contact ground on the taxiway. Wilco, UPS 1390 Heavy. Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Crossing runway 34 left, Indonesia 714 Heavy.
Australia 22, cross runway 34 left, please expedite. UPS 1390 Heavy, contact Sydney Kingsford Ground on 126.5. Contacting Sydney Kingsford Ground on 126.5, UPS 1390 Heavy.
Crossing runway 34 left, Australia 22.
Qantas 1, request permission to cross runway 34 left.
Qantas 1, cross runway 34 left, please expedite. Indonesia 714.
Contacting Sydney Kingsford Ground on 126.5, Indonesia 714 Heavy. Sydney Kingsford Ground, Qatari 401 Quebec Romeo, ready for pushback with information November.
Crossing runway 25, Emirates 578 Super. Qantas 64 Quebec Foxtrot Super, taxi to International Terminal Bay 25 via Alpha. Qatari 401 Quebec Romeo, hold position.
Taxiing to International Terminal Bay 25 via Alpha, Qantas 64 Quebec Foxtrot Super.
Holding position, Qatari 401 Quebec Romeo.
UPS 1390 Heavy, taxi to parking, at your discretion. November 5 Romeo Echo, taxi to Kavia Kilo.
Sydney Kingsford Ground, New Zealand 777, ready for pushback with information November, requesting runway 34 left.
Taxiing to Kavia Kilo, November 5 Romeo Echo. Egypt Air 204 Heavy, hold position. New Zealand 777, pushback approved, tail to the north.
Holding position, Egypt Air 204 Heavy.
Emirates 578 Super, taxi to runway 34 left, hold short of 725.
Pushback approved, tail to the north, New Zealand 777.
Taxiing to runway 34 left, will hold short of 725, Emirates 578 Super. UPS 1390 Heavy, continue taxi.
Stand by, Australia 22.
Continue taxi, UPS 1390 Heavy. Emirates 578 Super, request permission to cross runway 7. Emirates 578 Super, cross runway 25, please expedite. Egypt Air 204 Heavy, continue taxi. Crossing runway 25, Emirates 578 Super.
Continue taxi, Egypt Air 204 Heavy.
Sydney Kingsford Ground, Lufthansa 809 Heavy, ready for pushback with information November. November 1649 Bravo, request permission to cross runway 34 left. November 1649 Bravo, contact Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7. Contacting Sydney Kingsford Tower on 124.7, November 1649 Bravo. UPS 1390 Heavy, request permission to cross runway 25. New Zealand 777, hold position.
Holding position, New Zealand 777.
UPS 1390 Heavy, cross runway 25, please expedite. Crossing runway 25, UPS 1390 Heavy. Sydney Kingsford Ground, Air China 49 Heavy, ready for pushback with information November. Sydney Kingsford Ground, Singapore 12 Super, ready for pushback with information November, requesting runway 34 left.
Sydney Kingsford Ground, Virgin 798 Heavy, ready for pushback with information November.
Sydney Kingsford Ground, Australia 22, ready to taxi to runway 7 with information November.
Sydney Kingsford Ground, pushback approved, tail to the north. Singapore 12 Super, hold position. Holding position, Singapore 12 Super. Sydney Kingsford Ground, November 5 Romeo Echo, ready to taxi with information November. Australia 22, taxi to runway 34 left, hold short of 725.
Taxiing to runway 34 left, will hold short of 725, Australia 22. Australia 22, requests permission to cross runway 7.
Sydney Kingsford Ground, November 300 Alpha Tango, ready to taxi to runway 34 left with information November. Sydney Kingsford Ground, Charlie Romeo Alpha Zulu Yankee, ready to taxi to runway 34 left with information November. November 5 Romeo Echo, taxi to runway 34 left, hold short of 725. Taxiing to runway